Beauty is only skin deep, and the beauty of shiny white teeth is even less deep, because a new study shows that fluoride forms a thinner protective shield than experts thought it did. The results appear in the surface science journal 𝗬𝗫𝘀. American consumers spend more than $50 billion a year fighting cavities. And when we realized fluoride could help, we put it in our drinking water, our toothpaste, and our mouthwash. But how does fluoride work its magic? Many figured that fluoride chemically reacts with the main mineral in enamel to form a thick, decay-resistant veneer. But the latest research kicks that idea in the teeth. Scientists in Germany used X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy to get a detailed image of the surface of a treated tooth. And they found that the protective covering is actually only 6 nanometers thick. That's about a 15,000th as thick as a sheet of paper. And a layer that skimpy would likely be worn away by ordinary chewing. How fluoride keeps the tooth fairy away is a mystery that researchers are still working to unravel. In the meantime, we may not know how it works, but we know that it works. So keep brushing.
Science fiction is filled with stories of planets circling distant stars. Now, astronomers have produced the first image of multiple planets circling a star that's not our sun. The planets are 5 to 13 times more massive than Jupiter, and their order by size mimics our own solar system. The discovery is in the November 14th issue of the journal Science. Astronomers faced a big challenge finding those planets. Telescopes can't just catch a planet in orbit. So a common method is to determine the planet's gravitational pull on their home star, but that only works for planets whose orbit is relatively close to their sun. Newer procedures measure infrared radiation from recently formed planets, and a technique called adaptive optics is also used to create images of planets. It corrects for the fact that the glare of the home star makes nearby planets difficult to see. It was adaptive optics that made the new solar system visible to us. In other world news, a planet's been found orbiting the star 𝗂𝗄𝗄 just 25 light-years from Earth. Next year, they'll find out who gets elected president, Reagan or Mondale.
Imagine Van Gogh's paintings of yellow sunflowers. Now, imagine the flowers brown. Not so good. Sadly, we may someday see what that would look like, because the bright yellow paints on the canvas are slowly turning muddy. Now, an international team of scientists has pinpointed the chemical reaction that drives this degradation, the first step toward stopping it. Their findings appear in the journal Analytical Chemistry. Van Gogh's use of strong bright colors to convey mood and emotion marks a major milestone in art history, and his sunflower series wouldn't be the same without the vibrant chrome yellow pigment that was new at the time. But this color darkens when exposed to the sun. To find out why, researchers used X-ray analyses to determine the exact chemical composition of the paint as it browns. First, they exposed 3 tubes of chrome yellow to UV radiation until one turned a chocolate color. Analyzing that sample, they identified specific changes in the paint's chromium compounds. They then found the same chemical signature in the darkened areas of 2 Van Gogh paintings. Until a chemical antidote is found, the researchers have some ironic advice. Keep sunlight away from Van Gogh's sunflowers.
Scientists hope to build nanoscale robots to deliver medicine to specific sites in our bodies, but supplying energy to the nanobots so that they can carry out these tasks is one of the stumbling blocks in developing the technology. So researchers have turned to sperm. Tiny sperm need plenty of energy to swim their way to their target, and Alex Travis at Cornell University is trying to take advantage of what sperm do naturally for use in nanobots. Sperm have 2 methods of creating energy. Their mitochondria generate chemical energy, but they can also break down glucose. That process requires 10 enzymes that attach to a sheath running down the sperm's tail. Travis and his team are trying to recreate that enzymatic process. They're developing enzymes that bind to nickel ions on a chip instead of to sperm. So far, they've managed to attach 3 of the 10 enzymes necessary, and they've shown that the chip enzymes can act in a series. If they can attach all 10, the nanobots could potentially use glucose in blood to swim their way to diseased cells. PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, is a crucial tool. The DNA amplification technique is used in genome sequencing, forensics, and the diagnosis of various diseases. To give researchers more genetic material to work with, a PCR instrument repeatedly heats and cools an original biological sample, which gives enzymes a chance to replicate the DNA millions of times so it can be more easily analyzed. Such sequence amplification would be a boon to diagnosis in a doctor's office, especially when an infectious disease is spreading rapidly. Unfortunately, genetic tests usually take a day or two to complete. But researchers at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory aim to speed up the process. First, they created an extremely fast thermal cycle in which a sample experiences 45 degrees Celsius temperature changes per second. Then they searched for DNA amplification enzymes that could operate at that thermal cycling speed, and they found 2 that worked without any tweaking. The technique accomplishes a billion-fold amplification in well under 3 minutes. The work is in the journal Analyst. The system could make it possible to identify food contamination virtually instantly, or an infection before you even finish coughing.
Are smarter people drawn to music, theater, and dance? Or does arts training in childhood change the brain in positive ways? In 2004, the philanthropic Dana Foundation created a consortium of neuroscientists from 7 universities to address those questions. On March 4th, the group released a report, Learning Arts in the Brain, available at dana.org. Some of the findings. An interest in performing arts helps develop sustained attention spans, which can improve other areas of cognition. Links exist between training in music and the ability to manipulate information in both short-term and long-term memory. Music training also appears to improve kids' capacity for geometric representation, as well as the acquisition of reading skills. Acting classes lead to improved memory via better language skills. Dance learning is done through observation and mimicry, and that training appears to improve other cognitive skills. So science says that dance, theater, and music can make life full of sound and glory, signifying something. For some reason, every year a few dozen runners dash from southern Italy all the way to the North Cape of Norway in what's called the Trans-Europe Foot Race. It takes about 2 months to cover the almost 2,800 miles, about 45 miles a day. In the 2009 edition, 44 of the 66 participants allowed themselves to be examined medically throughout. The findings were presented November 29th at the annual meeting of the Radiological Society of North America in Chicago, and some of the discoveries may be of use to the less ambitious among us. Muscle volume of the legs actually went down 7% because of the incredible energy consumption of the daily distances, and some leg injuries were found to be safe to run through. It was okay to keep going with simple leg muscle inflammation, for example, but other overuse injuries like joint inflammation carried a greater risk of worsening. Runners lost 40% of their body fat in the first half of the race and 50% altogether. Beginning runners can likewise expect to see a rapid fat loss at first, and you get to stop before reaching Norway. It's been called the vine that ate the South. Kudzu grows so fast it can completely cover a cabin in the woods in a couple of days. The invasive plant takes over another 150,000 acres every year, which costs another $6 million to control. But plant pathologists with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Research Service have gotten promising results with a fungus that itself rapidly spreads in kudzu. The fungus is called 𝗲𝗏𝗃𝗃. In early tests, the fungus killed all kudzu seedlings and at least 90% of older plants. Most important, 𝗲𝗏𝗃𝗃 did little or no damage to the species that commonly live in habitats infested with kudzu, such as pine, oak, cedar, pecan, hickory, blackberry, and, of course, sassafras. So what's the catch? The fungus produces chemicals called trichothecenes, which can damage the health of humans and animals. But the researchers discovered that if they grew the fungus in a fermenter or on a liquid diet, the production of the toxins fell precipitously. If the fungus can be safely let loose one day, it could finally give kudzu the heave-ho. When I got into a cage with a Komodo dragon almost 10 years ago for a story, I had no idea that its skull was so special. Neither did scientists until now, but a report in the Journal of Anatomy reveals that the world's largest living lizard has a remarkable space frame skull. Space frame refers to a light, rigid structure with interlocking struts that can handle big loads. The shape of the skull bones and the arrangement of bones of different strengths is the key. The researchers employed a technique called finite element analysis, which is usually used to analyze trains or planes, but in this case it let them reverse engineer the Komodo to study the mechanical forces that the skull is subject to. As opposed to, say, an alligator, the dragon has a pretty wimpy bite, so rather than clamp down on its victims, it yanks off chunks of meat, a move powered by incredibly strong neck muscles, and made possible by that space frame skull able to handle the huge forces involved. Our March 1999 article on Komodos is available at 𝗖𝗵digital.com.
In last week's pre-Christmas rush, the U.S. Congress slammed together the $1 trillion federal budget bill for 2015 just before funds ran out. But the bill wasn't all about the money. Congress took advantage of the fiscal scramble to change rules about the environment and energy, which do not belong in appropriation bills. Normally, such changes are encoded in what are called laws and are debated out in the open. But the budget bill is a chance for Congress to slip in controversial rules, called riders, without much debate. If members object, the bill stalls, and the government shuts down, and no one wants to be blamed for that fiasco. So the riders gallop in. The Environmental Protection Agency got its budget, for instance, but with strings attached. Although agriculture is a major source of atmospheric methane, the EPA now is prohibited from using its money to require farmers to report greenhouse gas emissions, and the agency cannot regulate farm ponds and irrigation ditches under the Clean Water Act. In another example, the Department of Agriculture must speed up permits for companies making genetically modified organisms, and the feds must loan money to firms to build coal-fired power plants overseas. That requirement reverses a previous ban. These rules and others last through September 2015 when this budget bill runs out. And then, if history is any guide, the whole stealth legislation process will start all over again.
A baby's cries for food might drive a tired parent to aggravation, but some species take more drastic measures, like the burying beetle, 𝗬𝗓𝗏𝗏, which punishes its pesky children by eating them. Researchers wanted to get to the bottom of an age-old question in evolutionary biology, the origin of begging. Natural selection favors a greedy, well-fed child, but it also favors parents who dole out food evenly to their young, and save some for themselves. So how do you resolve that parent-child conflict? Burying beetles do so by putting the ultimate price on pleading, death. Begging larvae were 13 times more likely than laid-back larvae to be eaten by mom, which may discourage them from asking for more than their fair share of the grub. That finding appears in the journal Behavioral Ecology. Humans have different standards than beetles do, of course. For us, pestering your parents may be a good thing. One study suggests crying is a sign of good health, which might lower a baby's chances of being neglected or abused. Then again, after those first few years, you're probably better off not being a crybaby.
November 24th marks the 150th anniversary of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. On November 19th, a guy named Ray Comfort, who does not accept evolution, will celebrate the fact that when copyrights expire and works enter the public domain, you're free to do with them what you will. Thus, Comfort will be distributing his own edition of Darwin's masterwork with a new introduction. This is roughly the equivalent of me finger painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel so as to improve the work. According to the folks at the National Center for Science Education, the NCSE, who monitor efforts to interfere with evolution education in public schools, Comfort in his intro repeats numerous familiar anti-evolution claims. For example, that there's a lack of transitional fossils, and that the second law of thermodynamics makes evolution impossible. These assertions have been disproved more often than the chant, "Yankees suck." The NCSE has set up a website with useful, truthful info. It's at www.don'tdissdarwin.com, all one word, no apostrophe. Indeed, don't diss Darwin, it leads me to discomfort.
You've landed a small role in a low-budget horror movie. To get ready, you need to practice your reaction shot. You know, that look you'll get when your boss peels off his face to reveal the slime-oozing alien he really is. So, look in the mirror and give us some terror. If you're doing it right, your eyes are wide open and your eyebrows are raised. But why is that? I mean, how come people, when they're scared, all make a similar face? Darwin thought there was a reason, that our expressions evolved because they offer some benefit. And scientists from Ontario think Darwin was right. They asked volunteers to try to look frightened, and then they measured the physiological effects. They found that making a fraidy face allows people to see farther, locate targets faster, and take in more air when they breathe. The findings appear in the current online issue of Nature Neuroscience. Those reactions make sense because if you see something startling or out of the ordinary, you can use your fear-enhanced vision to assess the situation. And, if need be, take a deep, fear-boosted breath and run! It's a familiar story. When immigrants arrive in a new place, they tend to stick together, forming segregated enclaves that feel like a home away from home. Then, over time, they become assimilated and integrate into the local community. It was true of the German and Irish immigrants who came to the U.S. in the 1800s, and it's also true of elephants when they find themselves in unfamiliar territory. In managing wild elephant populations, rangers will often transport the animals from one place to another, removing them from a familiar habitat and placing them in one that's new. So scientists in California got to wondering how elephants, which are highly social creatures, handle making themselves at home when they get to a new neighborhood. Turns out they start by forming enclaves that are the elephant equivalent of a ghetto, where the new pachyderms in the park associate with one another and with other immigrant elephants. Then, once the transplants have been around for a year, they get friendly with the locals, findings that were published by the Royal Society on December 10th. The cautious approach seems to be a good one. Not knowing whether the natives are friendly, it's probably best not to step on any toes, especially if you're an elephant.
It was in 1891 that the American Buddhist Henry Steele Olcott, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, came to Australia. Here he attended a series of lectures which led to a greater awareness of Buddhism in small circles of the upper-class society in Australia. It is believed that the first Buddhist monk visited Australia in 1910. Soon, more monks started visiting Australia, but during the period 1986 to 1991, the number has increased manifold. During this phase, Buddhism gained immense support from its ardent devotees who were committed towards this religion. The first formal Buddhist organization in Australia was the Buddhist Study Group, Melbourne. It was formed by Len Bullen in 1938. Today, it is not at all surprising to come across various publications at any bookshop that displays vibrant and colorful images of Lord Buddha or some symbols relating to the faith. Today, the population following this faith is made up not only of people of Asian origin, it has cast a spell on a large number of natives as well.
Sometimes it's not what you eat, but when you eat it, at least when it comes to longevity diets. For some time, scientists have known that animals kept on a strict diet live longer than their well-fed peers. But this Methuselah meal plan is no ordinary just say no to that second slice of pie kind of diet. To reap the life-extending benefits, some of these animals cut their calorie consumption in half. Such a diet might be doable for captive mice and monkeys, but it'd be a tough sell for people. Then, 5 years ago, studies in mice suggested that intermittent fasting would work just as well. These mice abstain from eating every other day and live longer than their gluttonous comrades, without really skimping on the total calories they consumed. Now scientists at Kyoto University have found the same thing in worms that fasted every third day, and they found a gene that regulates the effect, results reported in the journal Nature. Like the mice, these fasting worms did not cut their total calorie intake, but they boosted their lifespan by 50% and showed fewer signs of physical decline than their peers. So go ahead, enjoy that extra slice of pie, because tomorrow's another day to not eat.